I am a 28-year-old female, had been engaged to my fiancé Terry, 30 male, for about 8 months. We got married last week, but unfortunately the ceremony didn't go as smoothly as we'd planned because Terry's ex suddenly reappeared right before our vows. Terry has been married before, and it was to his high school sweetheart, Eliza, a 30-year-old female. They were together for 3 years before they went their separate ways. It was Eliza's decision to file for divorce because she wanted to quit her job and be a housewife, but Terry wasn't making enough to be able to support them both at the time, and that ended up in a lot of fights. It was Terry who'd do all the work at home, Terry who would bring home more money, and Terry who would try to make up with her after every fight. All Eliza did was work and then come back home and start cribbing about how Terry was forcing her to work when she didn't enjoy it, without appreciating any of the things he did at home. He did all the dishes and the laundry and kept the entire house clean so she wouldn't have to take on any more work alongside her job, but she still wasn't happy. Terry suggested that they move into a smaller apartment to save on rent and cut costs so she could quit her job, but she wasn't willing to compromise on their lifestyle either. I can't imagine living with someone so difficult to deal with, and don't really understand how Terry managed to put up with her for 3 years before finally calling it quits. They got divorced like 6 years ago, and haven't been in touch since then. She's tried to talk to him several times, but he shut it down and has her blocked. She demanded alimony back then, but failed because there wasn't much of a difference in their salaries, so the court didn't think it was necessary. A few months after the divorce was finalized, she tried to speak to him through social media, but he blocked her, along with several other accounts that she'd created just to speak to him. He'd also changed his number and everything, so she wouldn't be able to contact him, and had also told his friends never to give out any of his contact info. He was basically unreachable for her, but she still managed to occasionally text him through fake accounts or send him emails that would go straight to spam. Then 3 years ago he met me through his cousin. I'd gone to college with his cousin, and she got married 3 years back. There we met each other because we were seated at the same table and found that we actually got along really well. He was funny, cute, and charming, and for me it was pretty much instant. We exchanged numbers, but because of his past he wanted to take it slow and really get to know me before things got serious. I respected that, and we took our time to get into a serious relationship. 3 years later, here we are, happily married. Had it not been for that little incident at the ceremony, I wouldn't even be on Reddit and would probably be enjoying my honeymoon like I was supposed to. So about 2 weeks ago, Terry had left for work, but I'd decided to work from home that day because I had to go to the other side of town later to pick up some stuff for the wedding. At around noon, the bell rang and I opened it to find Eliza on my doorstep. I knew who she was because I'd seen pictures of her with Terry a couple of times and could recognize her. I obviously didn't expect to see her at my doorstep and was taken aback for a few seconds. She smiled at me really smugly and then went on to ask if I was Courtney. And when I said yes, she came up to me real close and said that she knew about my dirty little secret. For a couple of seconds I had no idea what she was referring to, so I just stared at her blankly. And then she clarified by naming this guy I'd gone out on a date with a couple of weeks before I met Terry. So I'd been on a dating app during that time, and had matched with this guy, Sam. We'd talked for a couple of days, and then we went out on a date, but it was really boring and dull to be with him, so after I came back from the date I sort of ghosted him. I told him that I wasn't looking for anything serious at the moment, which was not exactly true, but I had to say something to break it off with him. He said that he was looking for something casual too, and continued to text me, so I had no other option but to stop responding when he didn't take the hint that I was just not interested. It wasn't really the right thing to do, but it wasn't like I'd dumped a guy after years of being together or something crazy like that. It had just been one date, I didn't like him much, so I ghosted him. That happens all the time, so I didn't really understand what the big deal was or what was so dirty about it. It had just been a few weeks before I met Terry. It was nothing serious, so I hadn't mentioned Sam to him by name, but he knew vaguely that I'd been seeing other people around that time. I was very confused when Eliza called Sam my dirty little secret, and I was still trying to process it when she cleared it up for me by saying that Sam was a good friend of hers now, and she knew that I'd been two-timing Terry and going out with Sam at the same time as him. She then hinted that she was going to tell Terry and make sure she ruined our wedding. At that point, I started laughing, because this was all so dramatic and unnecessary. It just felt like something straight out of a soap opera, and I couldn't help but laugh out loud at her strategy to meddle in our relationship. I remember she started looking really annoyed when I laughed at her, and straight up threatened to tell Terry if I didn't tell him myself and cancel this wedding. But I'd had enough by then, so I told her to get the hell out and slammed the door right shut in her face. She left afterwards, but I didn't tell Terry about her visit when he came back home. I figured she wouldn't be bothering me anymore, so there was no need for me to bring this up and mess with our good energy right before the wedding. So he remained blissfully unaware of Eliza's visit, and things were going so well for us until the day of the wedding. I'd walked down the aisle, tears had been shed, and we were about to get to the vows when Eliza walked in, screeching that we needed to stop the ceremony. We were all stunned, and even more so when we noticed the clueless little boy whose hand she was holding. She looked like she'd won the lottery when all of us stopped and turned to check out what the fuss was about, and went on to declare that this wedding couldn't take place because apparently the little boy she had with her was her and Terry's son, whom she'd been raising all on her own for 6 years now. She said that Terry had blocked her everywhere after their divorce, so she'd never been able to find him to tell him that she was pregnant with his baby. But now that she'd finally found him, she knew that she had to stop us from getting married. Terry looked like he was going to barf, and he was so shocked that I knew I had to be the one to step up and take matters into my own hands. There were obviously a bunch of glaring loopholes in whatever story she'd cooked up. If she really had been raising his kid for so long, then why hadn't she contacted him for child support? She'd wanted nothing but to be a housewife and quit her job when she was with Terry, but after she got pregnant, she was suddenly ready to be a career woman and a single mother. Yeah, seems very likely that a change like that just happened overnight, and she suddenly had the motivation and ambition to juggle everything all on her own. Besides, she'd been hell-bent on getting alimony, but after she found herself pregnant, she suddenly didn't care about the money and let the child support go to hell because she couldn't find Terry? I call bullcrap on that. She'd really wanted to. Then she would have found out where Terry was by hook or by crook and wouldn't have just given up trying. She'd very easily been able to find out our address to visit me before the wedding, and she could have shown up after that day too, but she'd chosen the day of our wedding specifically. Of course, it was for nothing other than dramatic effect, because deep down, she couldn't stand the fact that Terry was getting married again to another woman, and that he'd really and truly moved on from her. I told her that I knew for a fact that she was lying about the child being hers as well, and one paternity test would be enough to prove that. It was upsetting for everyone involved, but I had to say it to her. In response, she told me to stay out of this, as this had nothing to do with me, which was such a hilarious thing to say in the middle of my wedding. Then she pushed me aside so she could make her way to the stage, which is where she screwed up royally because I get very triggered if anyone physically attacks me. He instantly grabbed her and pushed her right back, then slapped her twice. Luckily, the boy she had come with had been taken aside by one of the guests in the catfight that happened next. She tried to slap me back, but by then people had started getting up and someone grabbed her to restrain her while Terry took me away. We were getting married in the backyard of our house because it was big enough to accommodate the number of guests we had. It was a small and intimate wedding anyway, and while Terry was taking me away in the middle of all the chaos, I felt grateful that there were not many people present to witness this very embarrassing temper tantrum of mine. Once Terry and I were inside the house, he calmed me down for the next couple of minutes because I was still red in the face and mumbling about him letting me have another go at Eliza. A few minutes later, my parents came inside the house and Terry left to deal with the commotion outside. Finally, about 20 minutes and a lot of shouting later, Terry came back in and he looked very upset. The two of us and all the other guests decided to take a breather before we went ahead with the vows. What had taken place right before that had been upsetting, but if we postponed or canceled the wedding that day, then she'd win, and we didn't want that. We also had a few guests who'd traveled a long way to be there for us on our special day, and we didn't want to let them down, so we took 10, and then went ahead with the wedding like we'd planned. The vows meant a lot to us this time around, because we'd just proven exactly how much faith we had in each other. We'd pretty much demonstrated our love and trust right before the wedding, and the vows just felt like verbalizing whatever we'd felt while I was defending him, and probably what he had felt when he was kicking Eliza out. I loved him, he loved me, and our wedding was a celebration of that. Everything else could wait. So that's exactly the thought process we went ahead with, and got married that day. It was not until 2 days later that we finally decided to bother ourselves with Eliza and how exactly she'd managed to find us, or why she'd shown up after so long. A friend of Terry actually confessed to him 2 days after the incident that it had been him who had let slip to Eliza that he was getting married. He hadn't said anything during the wedding and the time period after it because he was too embarrassed that one mistake of his had led to such a scene. He apologized, but it really meant nothing because he'd let us both down. Apparently, Eliza had been talking about Terry to her friends even until recently, and had been saying that she knew they were meant to be together eventually. So that friend felt that it was his moral obligation to let her know that we were getting married, and that Terry had moved on, so she wouldn't continue to have any false hopes. It didn't occur to that idiot that he also had a moral obligation to protect his own friends first, and make sure nothing about Terry's life reached Eliza. So we've cut him out of our lives, and that's that. I wanted to go to the cops, but Terry said we should just let this be because he doesn't want any more drama. But he wasn't the one to give Eliza my address or my one date with Sam. That was Sam himself. Now, coming to the thing about Sam. Apparently, he's Eliza's third cousin, and somehow they discovered this connection about me when they met at some family event a few weeks ago. They weren't close, but since Eliza looked depressed, they got to talking. Eliza had been telling him about how she'd just learned that the love of her life was getting married to someone else. And then she showed Sam a picture of Terry with me, which is what she'd received from Terry's friend, and of course he recognized me and told her all about it. Sam knew that we were getting married because we still followed each other on Facebook until the wedding. He was the one to share my address with Eliza when she asked, because she'd claimed that she wanted to visit Terry before he got married and talk to him one last time. I've been living in the same place ever since I got my first job, so a lot of people know where I live. And Sam had dropped me home after our first date, so that's how he knows. He told me he'd given her my address because he didn't think she'd do anything on the day of the wedding, but only mess with me a little before it. He said he'd underestimated just how insane she was and had texted me to apologize for her. He also told me that the boy she'd brought along with her was a son of one of their relatives, whom she'd claimed to be babysitting, but once she dropped the kid off at his parents', he'd told his parents what he'd seen, and then Eliza had been forced to tell all her family about what had happened at the wedding. She didn't have any regrets about it either. But when Sam found out what had happened, he started feeling guilty and decided to text me about it. And that's how I found out about everything. The real problem is that Sam only texted me yesterday and 2 days ago. Terry and I left for our honeymoon, which we are currently supposed to be enjoying. But we're not, because he's miffed with me. Yesterday I finally told him about Eliza's first visit to our house, and he was really mad because he thinks I should have told him that day itself, and then maybe we could have avoided the fiasco at the wedding. I tried to explain to him that I was just trying to protect him and make sure we kept the negativity away from our lives. Like Sam, even I didn't think Eliza would actually turn out to be such a huge nut job and do what she did at the wedding. We got into an argument about it last night when he told me that this whole thing could have been avoided if I'd just been transparent with him instead of trying to protect a grown man. And while I do agree with that, I don't think it's fair to put the entire blame on my shoulders. After all, it was his friend who'd told Eliza that there was a wedding happening. Had he not told her that, then she wouldn't have been depressed and wouldn't have talked to Sam about their family thing, and they never would have discovered the common link between all of this. Then maybe the incident at the wedding wouldn't have taken place at all. So I don't think it's completely my fault for not telling Terry about Eliza's first visit. We did speak before bed last night and made up, but he's still acting really off. And I can't put up with this sort of distant behavior. Not on what's supposed to be a happy occasion at the very least. Eliza already ruined a part of my wedding, and I don't want to let her ruin my honeymoon as well either, but it feels like she's succeeding. Am I the a-hole for not telling my husband about his ex-wife's first visit to us and her threat to break us up because I didn't want him to worry without reason? Update 1. Okay, so this is a day after I posted here on Reddit, and I've spoken to Terry about what happened. I was feeling really upset about everything, because it had never been my intention to lie to Terry about Eliza's visit. I just didn't want him to feel weird about it and ruin our happy mojo just a couple of days before our wedding, and I didn't want that to get in the way of us enjoying our honeymoon, so I talked to him about it and explained to him why I'd done what we'd made up the previous day, but I didn't think it had been effective enough, and today I found out that it was actually a lot of other things weighing on his mind too that were making him feel awful. For instance, he'd found out from his ex-mother-in-law a couple of days before that Eliza had gone on an anger-fueled rampage the day she was sent back home from our wedding, and had broken a lot of furniture and crockery in her fit before breaking down. She was still really torn up over it, and on top of that, her other relatives were also not speaking to her anymore because she'd taken the boy she was supposed to be babysitting with her to our wedding, and for some reason, the woman was blaming Terry for all of it. She believes that he'd been too quick to give up on their relationship, and that's what had caused all this. And Terry's been feeling like crap about these accusations because he thinks that, to a certain extent, he might be responsible for what's going on with Eliza right now, because he'd said a lot of horrible things to her on the day of our wedding while I was inside the house. And of course there was also the friend that we'd had to cut off because he'd been such a colossal idiot and was now talking crap about Terry, even though he and Terry had been really good friends in the past. He'd found out from another friend that he'd pretty much been the hot topic back home, and everyone was having the time of their lives discussing the embarrassing incident at our wedding in great detail. Even people he barely knew were talking about it, and only our close friends had been invited to the wedding. So it was obvious that they'd been gossiping about it too. It's just sad, and I totally get why he was acting weird about these things. Terry's a sensitive guy, and that's one of the things I love most about him, but he can also sometimes let things really get under his skin, which isn't healthy. So I sat him down and told him that people are obviously going to have a heck of a time talking about us behind our backs, but at the end of the day what matters is if we have each other's backs or not. He's the one I married, and quite frankly I couldn't care less if someone else is talking about me or not, and neither should he. The only thing we can do is not let this bother us and get in the way of our fun so we can make the best of our honeymoon, because this isn't going to come back. Those people are going to talk no matter what, so we might as well have some more fun and give them something to talk about. This cheered him up considerably, so now we're heading out to the beach for the evening and are probably going to get drunk and dance the night away with a bunch of total strangers, just for fun. Update 2. So we're back from our honeymoon and we've decided to have a ceremony again. Yep, we're going to take 3 now, but this time it's just going to be family and nobody else. We've realized that if our friends are the kind of people who would relish the opportunity to gossip about us more than valuing our privacy, then they're probably not the kind of people we want around us anyway. Terry and I are private people, and our wedding was really small in the beginning, but if we can't even trust the handful of friends we had invited, then I think we need to redo it all together, just for ourselves and our families. My parents think it's a great idea, and they do too. They've even offered to help us fund this one because we'd paid for the first one ourselves. It wasn't much anyway the first time around because of the size of the wedding, and this time it's barely going to cost us a thing because we're going even smaller and even more private. But at least when we look back on our wedding, we won't have to think of our vows being interrupted by Eliza's entry, or our friends who turned out to be traitors, or Sam who was a huge jerk. We'll just look back on us and our families, and that'll be it. So I think it's totally worth it to have another ceremony now. Update 3. Hey everyone, we went through with our wedding, and this time there was nothing else to worry about. It was just us, our families, and my best friend from childhood. But she's pretty much family anyway, so it doesn't count. Terry and I are really happy that we did this, and we're looking forward to being a proper married couple now. As for Eliza, the last we heard was that she and her mother had moved to Brooklyn to be with her father, who had been working there. Her mother had apparently forced her to come along because she didn't think the woman was stable enough to be left alone, and I really can't blame her for thinking that way about her own daughter. Eliza had sent Terry an email a few days back to tell him that he'd regret whatever he'd done to her, and that she knew that they were meant to be. She'd also told him whatever I just mentioned above because she wanted him to know that she was not moving away of her own free will but was being forced to, and since she still heavily relied on her parents for money, she couldn't just say no to them, so she had to go. She'd even attached her new address in Brooklyn in case Terry changed his mind about me and wanted to patch up. It was ridiculous, and just decided to ignore the email because there was only so much blocking we could do. We're just going to ignore her for the rest of our lives because now there's not much she can do to get under our skin. Terry and I are happy together, and that's all we care about now.